Thank you all so very, very much for coming tonight. I'm Susan Hammond, and I work here at the Science Center organizing all sorts of different events. I was the previous operator, so I got my hand in all sorts of different things. And this is one of the special areas that I really enjoy, being able to find people of interest and have them come and share their knowledge and background and specialties with you. It's a gorgeous day out there now. I know it's threatening. I know some people got caught in the rain, but overall, the land right now, it's so green and lush with the cool weather and that little extra bit of moisture. We're absolutely blessed to be in this area. And I hope you've had a chance to get out and see so many of the flowers and green plants that are growing right now. I was out yesterday and looking at the larkspur and just like, wow, this is just the spectacular time of year. Of course, we share these lands. The Shakopma people have been here traditionally on the unceded territory, and without them and their stewardship, we wouldn't have as much as we have now. So we're really, really lucky to be able to share and get out and enjoy our hills around us. I'm wondering, when you're out exploring, do you ever wonder what plants belong and which ones were introduced? I find myself wondering that sometimes. And then you hit a patch of an area and there might be hundreds or even thousands of something. And you go, wow, that's so pretty. And then you wonder, ooh, but is it supposed to be like that? Tonight, we're really lucky, again, to have Ralf. He's going to answer some of these questions. What belongs, what shouldn't be here, and what does invasive mean anyway? And how does that apply? Dave has been working, and let me get this right. Currently, he's with the Invasive Species Council. Previously, he worked with the BC Ministry of Agriculture and the BC Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations. He's worked almost exclusively with invasive plant management strategies for pasture range and intensive crop production. But what that means, from what I chatting with him and exploring a bit, really it means he's working with so many different partners to help get everything right. And that is an impressive operation to do. So First Nations, agriculture, community members, and that's you. So thank you so very much for coming tonight. I look forward to hearing Ralf. Could we give him a big round of applause and thank him?
Well, thanks very much for having me here tonight. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about one of my passions in life next to my family and my friends. Thanks. Okay, there we go. So as Susan mentioned, I'm Senior Operations Manager for the Invasive Species Council, and I've been with the council for about 9 years now. I retired from the provincial government and was asked to come to work for the council to doing some special projects, and that was 9 years ago. So anyway, needless to say, I like what I'm doing. So the Invasive Species Council gratefully acknowledges the territories of the Indigenous peoples of BC, where we live, work, and maintain healthy ecosystems for all. And I'd like to recognize the Tecumseh territory, where we are tonight. Who is the Invasive Species Council of BC? We're a nonprofit organization. We're guided by a board of directors who represent one of three chambers: governments, community, or business and industry. The mission of the council is to take action to build healthy landscapes and habitats and communities through education and responsible practices to prevent the spread of invasive species. So the Invasive Species Council of BC is the largest provincial invasive species charity in Canada. We focus primarily on education, outreach, training, a lot of cross-border collaboration across Canada, and we also collaborate with international partners. Founding member, and we're also the co-chair of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. What do? We increase awareness on the negative impacts of invasive species. We deliver and develop training programs for both business and industry, as well as Indigenous communities and local governments. We work to build responsible practices in the individuals and organizations in BC. We increase research on priority issues. We work a lot with the universities and a lot of the research scientists, both federally and provincially. And we build collaboration across all parties. As you'll see later on, we have quite a list of partners that we work with. And always a message we speak is invasive species know no boundaries. So they don't take into consideration political boundaries. They move where they wish. So some of our partners are provincial governments, federal government, the Indigenous communities, industry, forestry, mining, agriculture, tourism. We work a lot with local governments and regional invasive species organizations, and just some of the logos of the organizations and partners that we share. So what are invasive species? They're alien, they're non-native, they're invasive in the fact that they take over habitats, they're very aggressive, they displace native species and will, in certain situations, given them the opportunity, they'll create monocultures on our landscape. So over the years, you may have seen spotted knapweed in large areas and taking over a lot of the grassland areas. In BC, there's 64 invasive plant species listed as noxious in the Weed Control Act regulations, and over 175 species regulated at all the provincial, federal, and local government levels in their regulations and statutes. And primarily tonight, I'm going to be speaking on invasive plants. Near the end of the presentation, I'll be speaking on some other invasive species like aquatics. So more than weeds, invasive species include animals, insects, mammals, and also fish. So I like a little bit of interactive activities here tonight. I like to fit them into the presentation. So which of these is the estimated economic impact of invasives? We can see that and these are some of these figures are very dated, 50 million a year in lost crop productivity in agriculture. Japanese beetle established can create annual crop loss of 14.5 million. If zebra quagga mussels were to find their way to BC, they estimate that it could be 64 to 120 million per year. And invasive plants in crops and pastures cost an estimated 2.2 billion every year. And these are all true facts. Climate change has become a real issue and a topic of discussion and concern over the last few years. The agriculture industry and a lot of research scientists at both universities and with a lot of the United States and Canadian government agencies have been tracking the movement of invasive plants in agriculture for many, many years. And there's a lot of data coming out now after a lot of research, and now that it's being published. And plants that have traditionally been south of the border are now moving north of the 49th parallel. The invasive species and plants, they expand range, they increase the introduction and establishment. It increases the rate of species movement with the warming temperatures and often drier climates as well. Invasive plant species are very tolerant of drought and lack of moisture. Lack of or shorter cold winters. I know that many of you will remember the winters back when we were younger, where it was 35 below for many weeks, often in September and February. We don't see that anymore. And the domestic and industrial trade level and the trade routes and structures are compromised by invasive plants. So as these plants increase and move into our jurisdictions and into Canada, they are going to have significant impact of what in the same way they have had in the United States. So climate change with the warming temperatures, we see an increase in fuel. You'll see here on the right, that is cheatgrass down in the States, and that has taken over the native grass, and cheatgrass is a very highly flammable annual grass and fuels fires. This particular picture here is yellow star thistle. There's a sample over here, and that is virtually, as I referred to earlier, a monoculture of yellow star thistle down in Washington State. So they contribute part of the reason for the Maui fires the other year to the amount of invasive plant species and grasses that were fueled the rapid movement of those fires. They increase the impact for floods. As you can see here, when a forest fire goes through an area and completely removes the vegetation, there's no holding power in the ground by native plants and rooting systems, so flooding occurs. You'll see along the highways in Cache Creek and so forth that they say during rain events, do not stop along the highway. There's a lot of flooding that goes on and risk of soils washing onto the highway and creating issues. As well, we start to see plants like Himalayan balsam and knotweed increasing, and they will not allow very good bank stability along creeks and water courses, and it affects the shading for salmon habitat. So we're always dealing with pathways, how the routes in which invasive plants and other species move. So a few programs that we've got with the council are Clean, Drain and Dry. This is a program for zebra and quagga mussels and other aquatic species. Buy local, burn local. Don't move firewood from one region to the next. You may be moving insects. Play, clean and go. Species like puncture vine. That seed head of puncture vine can penetrate a bicycle tire and get caught up in bicycle tire tread and get caught up in your backpack and in your hiking boots. We have a plant-wise program where we try to encourage people to plant plant native species or non-invasive horticultural species instead of invasive species like English ivy or butterfly bush or knotweed. We also have a Don't Let It Loose program whereby don't flush your aquarium animals, fish, turtles, snakes down the toilet or set them free. They'll end up in the natural environment, and I'll show you some pictures of goldfish later. And then the iNaturalist, if you folks are interested and use apps on your phone, iNaturalist is a very good application on iPhone for identifying plants and also for posting locations of plants that you find. So we also do a lot of education, reporting awareness for individuals, organizations like the youth and local community, recreationalists and tourists. And some of the educational material I've laid out here on the tables, and feel free to help yourself and take what you wish. We also produce best management practices for different sectors of government and industry. We do one for highways, utilities, forestry, and also for local government. We've got a program that we sponsored and worked with the BC Realtors Association to make their agents aware of the invasive plants that are in BC for when they're selling properties. You sell somebody a piece of property with knotweed on it. If they're not familiar with it, they're not going to be very happy to know that it's on their property after they've bought it. I've had a number of people contact me with that situation. And we do a lot of training, both virtual and in person. We've got our website is bcinvasives.ca, and it's got all of the educational material there. Since our inception in about 2004, we've been an organization that has been virtual from the very beginning. We have staff that's located all across the province. So when COVID hit, we didn't really miss a beat. We were always virtual, and we met on conference calls and on virtual video calls. So it was very effective for us, and we were very good at it. So just a few slides here to test your knowledge. How many of these are invasive species? Oh, I've already moved it to the back. Okay, that's okay. I've got lots of slides so we can move along. But you can see here that fireweed is a native, and then bunchberry is native too. But all of these other ones are invasive or alien, and typically have been in BC for quite a few years. You'll notice cheatgrass is there. And burdock is an interesting plant. It was a plant that the idea for Velcro came from. And one of the real concerns with burdock was not only is it get caught on livestock, but there's a little exhibit over here on bats. We see a lot of, over the years, bats are increasingly getting caught up in burdock plants. And then as well as birds. So especially concerned with bats, with the amount of decrease in the bat population due to the white nose syndrome. So here's 3 species that, how many of these spread through seed mixes? North Africa grass is a fairly new invasive grass to BC. Quackgrass has been around forever, as well as Canada thistle and sow thistle, and all 4 of them are found in seed mixes. Quackgrass, Canada thistle, and sow thistle are a real concern up in the Peace River because there's a lot of seed crops in the Peace River, and they contaminate the seed for various crops, and then it reduces the price and the quality for those crops. And a lot of the seed, they can't screen it out. It's often the same size. So I'm going to go through a few species, plant species in the Thompson-Nicola region. Some of them are found and have been here for quite a while. Others I'm going to speak to are either haven't found their way here or are in very low populations, and the infested area is well known by the TNRD and the ministry programs that are involved in invasive plant management. So there's a big push on the ones that aren't here in great numbers to contain them or reduce their numbers, whereas plants like spotted knapweed, it's very strategic in how we manage those. But spotted knapweed reduces forage for livestock and wildlife. It increases soil erosion. It's a tap-rooted plant. It has no soil holding power, not like the fibrous roots of grasses and native grass species. And it does release a chemical that kills surrounding plants. It's called allelopathy. And it has a toxin that it exudes into the soil, and it will deter or reduce the vigor of native plants that are growing near it. Its method of spread is strictly seed production. Back in the 80s, we did some buried seed trials with the Ministry of Agriculture. And our last exhumation of buried seed was 14 years after burial. We were getting 25% germination of the knapweed seed. So you can see if a knapweed goes to seed in the natural grasslands or environment, that seed has the potential to be viable for many, many, many years. Management of knapweed is to prevent seed production. It doesn't kill the plant, but it does stop it from producing more seed. Digging or cutting. If you dig, we always say a rule of thumb is if you can get a good 2 inches below the soil surface and sever the root, there's a good chance that that plant will not be able to regrow. But if you pull it and it snaps off at the root crown, biennial or perennial plants will regrow. Herbicides are very effective on knapweed, and as well we've been very fortunate to have biocontrol of the diffuse knapweed species in BC. It is actually considered under biocontrol. We don't do any management with it other than allowing the bioagents to maintain the populations to keep them at very low levels. Dramatic reduction in diffuse knapweed. A lot of the same species of biocontrol insects and agents are working on spotted, but we just haven't seen the results that we saw on diffuse. Fingers crossed, any day now. I've been saying that for a couple of years. But I'm optimistic. We've had some really great successes with biocontrol in BC. Dalmatian toadflax, you've probably seen this around. It has a snapdragon type flower, and it grows a lot on dry areas. It has that bright yellow flower. It grows well on cut blocks and landings. It can encroach on grazing grasslands, and it's unpalatable to animals. So this is a constant amongst a lot of invasive plant species, is they're not palatable. Sometimes they're palatable at very early stages of growth in the seedling or early germinants, but once they start maturing, they become very fibrous and really have no nutritional value either. And it has a waxy leaf and it clasps the stem. Mechanical management through cutting and mowing, it starves the roots and prevents seed production. It's also effective being tilled if it's found in any pasture situations. Although typically we see most of it on non-irrigated, non-pasture sites and grasslands. Pulling and burning is ineffective. It's got a rhizomatous root, and it just snaps off and will regrow. And of course, burning is typically not effective even before we had the concerns over wildfires. Typically fires, grass fires and lighting up pasture, the heat in that fire is not usually hot enough to destroy the seeds in most plants. Herbicides are effective on it, and we've been successful with biocontrol on Dalmatian toadflax as well. A stem miner, and you can see the little black weevils here on the stem, and they feed on the terminal shoots, the buds of the plant, and then they mine the stem. Another species you've seen a lot, and it's really increased over the last 20, 30 years, is Horiolisum. It's got that real bright flower. It's very distinctive with its flower petals. And one of the things about Horiolisum is it grows either as an annual, biennial, or perennial, and there's really no way of knowing by looking at it which one it is. And as the plants mature, their seed pods, or they form seed pods, so they're the lower seed pods, which are produced after flowering on lower part of the stem, they're viable, and as the plant grows, each new seed pod section, they mature. So it's almost like it's got viable seeds throughout the entire growing season, not just waiting till the end of the growing season when it finally matures. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of these invasive plants are drought tolerant, so they are prolific when we have these drought periods like we have been experiencing in BC over the last few years. Horiolisum is not a difficult plant to control. Cutting and mowing low before flowering will stop seed production, and pulling, and if you're going to burn, you should pile it and do it during times when there's no fire risk. It's also very well controlled by the use of tillage in early spring. I've seen some fields, pastures that have been old pastures that were heavily infested with Horiolisum, and they were cultivated and renovated and reseeded to grasses, and the grass and the new seedings were very effective at suppressing Horiolisum. Horiolisum is also controlled by a few herbicides. It's a mustard species, so it doesn't have the list of herbicides that some of the other species have. And there is no biocontrol currently for the species Horiolisum. Blueweed is a high priority species in BC and also in the TNRD. The lower Nicola region is quite heavily infested with blueweed, and to that end, what's been done there, we've created a containment area around that. So in containment areas, we work to keep the infestation contained, and we work to control all of the sort of satellite infestations. We approach weed management very similar to the way the forestry approaches wildfires. They contain the main fire, and they concentrate on all the spot fires that are happening around it. And then once they have the opportunity, they try to decrease the size of the fire. We do the same with a containment area. We try to decrease the size if we have the resources and the opportunities. It reduces forage quality on rangeland and pastures and is very painful to the touch. If you're going to pull blueweed, you should be wearing gloves for sure. It spreads by seed production only, and digging or cutting before seed set or herbicide is effective control methods for it. It does not have any biological control. Hawkweeds. We have both yellow and species in BC, approximately 11 invasive yellow hawkweeds in BC, and 1 orange hawkweed species in BC that's invasive. It can create very dense mats and actually smother out all of the existing vegetation on a pasture or in an area where it invades. It's got lots of basal leaves that smother the plants and almost overlap leaves and form a mat. It spreads by stolons as well as seed. So it's a good example of yellow hawkweed taking over a pasture up in the Caribou region. Hawkweeds are spread by seed production as well as by stolons, or similar to the way strawberries spread. They send out the stolons and then they reroute along that stolon. Cutting prevents seed production. Digging small areas works. I emphasize small areas. And tillage, if it's in a pasture or a crop situation. Herbicides, and as well, over the last 5-6 years, we have introduced a gall wasp to hawkweed species in BC, and right now it's being increased and sort of protected until we get numbers that we can effectively go out and collect without reducing the initial population of the initial release. Now, knotweed is not very frequently found in the Thompson-Nicola region, and I'm basically speaking about the Thompson-Nicola region, which will also, spill over into the North Okanagan as well, and into the Shuswap region. But knotweed is a very aggressive plant. It's got an extensive rooting system. Roots can extend 5 meters into the soil depth, and they can extend 20 meters beyond an individual plant. It damages infrastructure. It will grow through, the roots will send up shoots that will grow through asphalt. They've been known to grow through concrete foundations and destroy septic tanks. In the United Kingdom, if you have knotweed on your property, there is a number of banks that will not mortgage that property due to the fact that knotweed exists and it has the potential to cause severe structural damage. It's very aggressive, as I mentioned, and very hard to kill. Significant control and management and repair costs are always involved with knotweed. And typically the most predominant species of knotweed in BC is Japanese. There are 3 other species: giant knotweed, Bohemian knotweed, and Himalayan knotweed. Knotweed spread by rhizomes and some seeds. It was thought for many years that knotweed did not reproduce by seed, but I believe it's the Bohemian knotweed, which is a cross or hybrid of giant and Japanese, it's been found that the seeds are viable. So one more mechanism of spread that we have to deal with an already aggressive plant. We always recommend do not cut knotweed because it will exacerbate the plant. It will send out more shoots and more roots will extend farther beyond. Often herbicide is the answer for a lot of situations. And if not, a removal by excavator. You've got to dig out that entire root ball of Japanese knotweed or any knotweed plants. And then you have to dig a hole that's at least 5 meters deep and bury it. And that's also shown to be effective. Very deep burial. You might have heard of giant hogweed. It's predominantly found at the coast, but it's also a concern here. And I brought it up because it's a very similar plant to cow parsnip. And we see a lot of cow parsnip up in the interior. And even though a giant hogweed is the one that's touted as the very highly toxic sap, can cause burns and blistering and scarring, the sap in cow parsnip can also do the same thing, maybe not to the extent, but it's not typically found in areas where people are congregating or recreating. The real serious risk is to human health. If you get the sap on your skin, now you've become photosensitized, and if you go out in the bright sunlight for a number of years down the road, the blisters will reoccur. So often you're stuck with wearing long sleeve clothes and so forth like that, so that the UV rays don't get the toxin working again and cause the blistering. Methods of spread are strictly seed production. It doesn't spread by roots. It's sort of a tap fibrous root. And if you cut in a giant hogweed before seed set, you run a good risk of reducing the population. And it's usually a biennial to short-lived perennial. So a few cuttings and often the plant will just die off. Himalayan balsam, also known as policeman's helmet, just the shape of the flower, it looks like a British policeman's helmet. And we find it along water courses. It's an annual, it's shallow rooted, and it's easily controlled by just hand pulling and before seed. Herbicides options are limited because of its proximity to water, but pulling, digging, or cutting and pulling it before seed set is very effective. Scotch thistle, I wanted to bring to your attention. It's found extensively in the North Okanagan Regional District. If you travel down to Vernon during the summer, you'll see it growing along the side of the road and out in the pastures around the north head of the lake area. It forms very dense stands. It can grow up to 9 feet tall. And when it does become heavily infested in an area, it can really prohibit people and livestock from moving through. It just becomes that solid wall of prickly thistle in the Scotch thistle. It tends, as with a lot of invasive plants, it thrives in nutrient deficient soils, areas that are overgrazed in pastures and rangeland. So if you have pastures or rangeland, you want to keep them in good health to resist the invasion of invasive species. And also, as with a lot of the invasive plants, they have an impact on wildlife habitats and the forage availability for wildlife as well. Strictly a seed producer, it's a biennial to short-lived perennial. Does that plant look familiar to you if you're driving down to Vernon? June and July, you'll see it. When you get to the racetrack just before head of the lake and all the way along there, it'll be quite noticeable. Herbicides are options, pulling and digging or cutting, and pulling or digging and removing it before seed set is always the best timing. When you have taprooted plants, often just cutting them to reduce seed production or eliminate it is very effective over a few years. Another species in the North Okanagan that we're always on the lookout for, and it's a high priority species in the TNRD, like Scotch thistle, is rush skeleton weed. And it gets its name because it's got a real lack of leaves, and it looks like a skeleton of a plant. And it can grow very extensively in dry situations as well as fertile soils. It's a real issue with harvesting crops in cultivated plants. It has a white toxic sap that will gum up all of the cutters and the harvesting equipment that are used to bring in the crops, be them grains or forage or whatever. And as you can see here on the bottom left, it has taken over that area. That was a field that was cultivated and not planted, and it's completely overtaken it. It looks very similar to a dandelion rosette or a dandelion seedling, like you see here. The difference with rush skeleton weed is it's got red hairs that point down on the bottom of the stem. There's another picture of a really solid infestation of rush skeleton weed down in the North Okanagan. Seed production and stolons, as well as some deeper roots. And the management is cutting to prevent seed, digging, tillage in crop situations, and also herbicide. There is a couple of effective biocontrol agents for skeleton weed. Unfortunately, we don't know why, but one plant will be completely stripped and no flowers or seeds produced, and a plant right next to it will have got no damage on it at all. So the scientists aren't sure why. We often find that it takes a while to come up with these rationales to what we're seeing. Marsh plume thistle is another priority species in the TNRD. It's found predominantly up in the Robson Valley from Valemont to Prince George, and also out in the Prince Rupert area, which was the initial infestation in the early 60s in BC. It started to move very quickly in the Robson Valley, and that is now a containment area. And we're very vigilant for marsh plume thistle in other areas of BC where it happens to show up. We are quick to get out and try to control it and eliminate the infestations. We find marsh plume thistle will grow in areas from a gravel pit to a sedge meadow, and it doesn't seem to have any areas where it won't flourish. Cutting and mowing, cut low before flowering. And this is a picture of, there is actually a person in there that that's about 6 feet with their hand held straight up in the air, and you can't see that. It also grows very tall in these wet meadows and will grow up to 8-9 feet tall. Herbicides are very effective, and often with cultural management practices, you're encouraging or enhancing competitive desirable species like grasses or legumes or native species as well. Biological control is pending. A species alert is poison hemlock. It's starting to show up. If you are traveling Highway 1 between the highway and the golf course just before Barnhart Vale, you'll see the poison hemlock growing along the ditch and in the banks of the ditch along there. And it's very toxic to humans, and it strictly reproduces by seed. A couple of terrestrial early detection rapid response. These are species in BC that, if found, the provincial government will take action to manage them. And that's black henbane. Impacts are on agricultural, and it's very poisonous to livestock, and it strictly reproduces by seed. The main infestations in BC are Alexis Creek and some small infestations around the city of Williams Lake. But other than that, we don't really know of it. We didn't hear of one site up in the Deadman, and we went up to have a look and we couldn't find it. So, perennial pepperweed. There's some perennial pepperweed over here. As I mentioned, is a species that has impacts both economically, agriculturally, and ecologically. Water levels are depleted. It thrives near water courses, but it also thrives in very dry sites as well. and it reproduces by seed and creeping roots. The creeping rooted seed producing plants are always the most difficult to control and manage. So this next section is not really about plants. Well, it's about plants, but not specific species. It's more or less just an explanation of how we approach invasive plant management and some of the techniques and actions that we go through in order to get effective management. So the resource industry is always on the lookout for invasive plant incursions. They do a lot of bare soil and they do a lot of disturbance. We have a project with the Ministry of Transportation and Highways with the council, and we started about 9 years ago managing invasive plants in their gravel pits. And we started out with about 13 gravel pits the first year, and our list is in 2023 was 187 gravel pits. So we don't treat all of them every year, but we've seen our number of pits that we manage increase, and the amount of herbicide that we use in those pits decrease despite the increase of land. And so we're getting very effective management there using an integrated pest management approach. So the strategic planning for an integrated pest management approach to any type of invasive species is education, prevention, inventory, treatments, restoration, and monitoring. And those are typically the 6 steps that you go through when you're dealing with an invasive plant species specifically. You've got to know what your invasive plant species are, and you've got to know where they are. So if you don't know what to look for, or what's invasive or in your area, or what's invasive on the borders of your jurisdiction, you don't know what's coming, and you're not going to know how to deal with it if you don't understand its biology. So prevention is typically the first step. Knowledge enables you to prevent invasion, and it also allows you to shut down the pathways and eliminate the vectors of spread. And typically pathways are the routes that it spreads, like it will spread along highway corridors, it will spread from gravel pits, and the vectors are the vehicles or the soil or the aggregate. So the medium that they typically move in is the vectors. This is a little bit scientific, but this is called the invasion curve. And when a plant or an invasive species first becomes known in an area, that's when prevention is the key method of dealing with it. You go out there and you prevent it from establishing further or from growing anymore. And then it will start spreading a little bit, and small amounts will show up, and you're still at a point in time of that plant's infestation and incursion where you can actually eradicate it. And then once it gets a little bit more established, we talk about it being, now it's coming into rapidly increasing, and now you're talking about containment, like I'd mentioned with blueweed. And then anything beyond that, where it's the invasive species is widespread and abundant, you're looking at biocontrol. So there's a very small window there that we can prevent or stop or eradicate an invasive species from taking hold. So it's very important that you get on it when it first seeing. And if you know what you're looking for, that'll be your trick. So you know what you're looking for, you know what you've got, where is it? And you got to know where it is and what you've got before you can start making any management plans to address it. You want to set goals and objectives. So your land management goals provide a general sense of direction. They're observable and achievable, and they typically go and look at the big picture to protect a local watershed, to protect species at risk. And then your objectives are what you use to achieve your goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're scheduled, they're deadlines, and they're location specific. So an objective may be on a site, I'm going to reduce knapweed by 50% in 3 years. Or I'm going to eradicate any new species in the first year that we find it or it incurs. So they're much smaller, they're more targeted, and they're very much specific. Management techniques, we've got a big toolbox and we utilize all the tools in it when we can, and we often are, more often than not, utilizing combinations of them. So prevention, physical strategies such as mechanical or manual control, cultural strategies such as planting crops that are going to be resistant and also increase. Grazing is often used as a tool as well, herbicide use, and also biological control. And we often use a number of these on one site. We can use biocontrol and herbicide and grazing. So it's whatever the combination is best suited for that specific land site. So as I mentioned, pathways, and I can't stress prevention and pathways and vectors enough, is like I mentioned, pits, water, developments, transportation routes are the pathways, and the soil movement, machinery, and people and wind are the vectors. People are the thing that spreads and moves invasive species the most, more than any other mechanism of spread combined. So physical strategies, as I mentioned, tillage, cultivation, hand pulling or digging, mowing or cutting, burning, not a good choice for more reasons than in the past. But you've got to know your biology in order to know what techniques here are effective at controlling your weeds. Consider crop rotation if you're in a cropping situation. Consider the species that you're going to plant. Is it competitive? Is it quick to establish, hardy? Is it suitable for the region and the soils and the climates? If you're going to be planting, look at your seeding rates and your varieties. And there's always some great information available from your local agricultural stores. I always say to somebody, if you're going to be planting or you're going to be dealing with some agricultural cropping situation, do a fertility test. Do some soil testing to find out what your macronutrients are, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and some of the micro, like sulfur and zinc. That way it'll tell you whether you need to fertilize or you're okay and the soil's very fertile. Soil moisture is always going to determine your germination success, and depending on whether it's irrigated or not, will be take into consideration when you're choosing your crop species. Targeted grazing. We used to be considered using cattle for, or only using sheep and goats for targeted grazing. They like to focus in on the invasive plants. They don't typically go for grasses. But we're also using cattle to control weeds too. And there's a professor out of the University of Colorado where she can take small herds of cattle and train them to eat Canada thistle or whatever weed species you want. It's a little bit time consuming. She starts off with big feed buckets and she starts putting alfalfa pellets in. And then she has to go out and say, for example, if it's Canada thistle, she has to harvest some Canada thistle plants and she starts introducing them to the feed bucket each day, more and more. And after about 30 days, they're pretty much just eating Canada thistle. And when they get pushed out onto the pastures, they will migrate to the Canada thistle. So it's very time consuming. It's not something that every rancher or beef producer can have the time to do, but for small cattle producers and weed problems, maybe it's a good opportunity. As I mentioned earlier before, we are using goats. We're working with Enbridge pipelines to do some goat grazing trials up in Fort St. John. And we're going into our second year with them. So we're looking forward to the data we're going to be able to glean from that. As with any invasive plant species, it's not a one-shot treatment. You have to go back and do maintenance or follow-up treatments, whether you're using goats, cutting, herbicides, it doesn't matter. So now now grazing is used to remove weeds, not just a consideration for good native grass health and competition, leaving enough grass and not grazing it to bare ground. Just to give you an idea of some of the permits and licenses that we have to go utilize in BC, we are only using herbicides that are registered under the Federal Pest Control Products Act. So the federal government, Health Canada, has approved that. We are guided and governed in BC by the Integrated Pest Management Act and regulations. They are responsible for ensuring applicators are certified and licensed to their categories, be it landscape, noxious weeds, forestry. And if you are applying pesticides in BC other than on your own property, you are required to have a pesticide user license. If you are doing work on Crown land, you must carry out your treatments under a pest management plan that's developed by the Ministry of Forests and Ministry of Transportation and Ministry of Parks, Environment, Parks. And that is about a 50 or 60-page document that is basically the playbook to how we go about controlling invasive plants on public lands. And then we're required a pesticide use permit may be needed. And those are typically areas that are maybe adjacent to water courses or sensitive areas. If we're applying herbicides to the environment on Crown land and recommended for all lands, we can use glyphosate up to 1 meter above high water mark, or all the other herbicide products, we can't go any closer than 10 meters. And that's typically on level ground. As the slope increases to the water, so does the pesticide-free zone. The label is the final say on the use of a herbicide. It indicates the product, what the mode of action of that herbicide is, when to use it, what growth stage, what plants it controls, and what crops are tolerant or not tolerant to it. It also deals with soil textures and also resistance. Resistance comes from repeated use of herbicides on the same plant, on the same site. We've seen that happen with glyphosate, and we are working, one of the goals of the, or the objectives of the gravel pit program we have is to not be reliant on glyphosate and to use some other herbicides that are residual, so we don't keep going in year after year with the same product on the same site and sometimes repeatedly. So this is the Lewis Creek gravel pit just before Barrier on the road, Agate Bay Road. And in 2015, that was all spotted knapweed. And after one treatment in 15 and some follow-up in 2016, we've got a complete cover of grass there. That wasn't seeded. That was grass there that was being suppressed by the knapweed, and it naturally regrew, and now it's doing a great job at resisting the re-invasion of knapweed, and we really don't have to go on there and use herbicides anymore. If we were using glyphosate, which is non-selective and non-residual, the site would still look like that. So we're very pleased with the results. So biocontrol is something that BC has excelled in. The biocontrol is the use of natural enemies such as insects and pathogens, and they are best suited for large, dense infestations. They weaken the target species and bring invasive plant species down to below an economic or an environmental threshold. We call that the injury threshold. So you don't have to eliminate or eradicate a plant, but can you live with what's there? And we have found that equilibrium or that threshold we have reached with diffuse knapweed and biological control of that species. As I mentioned, we're very advanced in the biocontrol program. We've got 18 plant species that have reduced infested area due to biocontrol. We've got 8 plant species that we consider under biocontrol, diffuse knapweed, nodding thistle, tansy ragwort, and we don't do any management control on those species. We just let the biological control process take care of it. And it's an ebb and flow. It's very much like coyotes and rabbits. Rabbit populations increase, so do the coyotes. And then the rabbit populations decrease, well, the coyotes population decreases too. So it's sort of a bell curve. So it's self-regulating and it's not consistent, but it's long-term effective. And in BC, like I mentioned, one of the reasons we have control of diffuse is we've got 14 different insects working on it. Seed head insects, root insects, defoliating insects, and they all work in unison to control different parts of the plant's reproductive system and or reduce its thriftiness and its vigor. Yeah, they're very target specific. Like the insects for knapweed, only knapweed. The screening process is exhaustive. When we first started introducing insects to knapweed species, I'm trying to think of the species that is a crop, and it's related to the knapweed, the centaurea. But we screen those insects before they even get released, starting in Europe at facilities, and we make sure that they're not going to feed or reproduce on desirable crops or desirable native species. So it's exhaustive. It's an Agriculture Canada jurisdiction, and no, we haven't had any concerns yet. It's actually, compared to 20 or 30 years ago when we were introducing it, it's much more stringent now. So we're quite confident. The species we have here, St. John's wort, back in the 50s, there was about 94 million acres of St. John's wort from California to British Columbia. And they introduced 2 beetles that were defoliating beetles, the chrysolina beetles. And within about 5 to 10 years, they had reduced the amount of infested area or acres of St. John's wort on the west part of the continent by about 80 to 90%. So it was very effective. It was the first biocontrol success. This is what I talk about as an injury threshold. This isn't acceptable, but the odd plant of leafy spurge is. And okay, we can live with that. And if the insects are there, they will keep them in check. Always use certificate of analysis. We always say if you're buying seed for reseeding, either it be an industrial site or whatever, get a certificate of analysis of the seed. It will tell you every weed seed that's in that seed mix. And you can, that will, whereas of seed standards and classifications for the federal government, there is a tolerance for weed seeds in them. But certificate of analysis gives you a complete analysis of all the seeds that are in there. Very highly recommended. Ministry of Transportation will not allow any any contractors that are reseeding to use seed that doesn't have a certificate of analysis. So you've done all your work, you've done your management program. Now you got to go back and you got to monitor it. You got to take some good initial information, keep it simple, ongoing, and you focus on the cause and effect, and you want to adjust your management plans if required. Maybe your combination of management tools didn't work very well. Maybe you used the wrong herbicide. Maybe you didn't get effective establishment of some biocontrol agents. So, reevaluate, get together with your colleagues and try to do some problem solving. And, next time out, maybe you want to go earlier next year. Maybe you want to do 2 passes, 2 control passes of activities in a year. Early spring, in the fall. And keep good records so that you know what kind of success or non-success you're having. And just in summary, you want to prevent invasive species from establishing or invading. You want to identify them by being knowledgeable about them, map them and inventory where they are, make your control decisions, use your combinations, your strategies in combination, and you monitor the effectiveness of your work and make adjustments as needed. So those are really the things: prevention, identification, knowledge, mapping, decisions, utilization, you're on the ground, and then monitor. If you follow those 6 rules, you're going to have a successful control program. Okay, so I'm going to go through some aquatic invasive species, some plants, some fish. One of the things we're worried about in BC is zebra mussels and quagga mussels. And if you've read any research or read anything about them, they are, well, that's what it looks like back in some of the lakes in Ontario. They completely take over. The Hoover Dam, Lake Mead, has got zebra mussels in it. And every year in Hoover Dam, I heard they'll take out 1 or 2 turbines and clean all of the zebra and quagga mussels out of it, and then reinstall it and keep doing that with the turbines, more turbines each year, and then start all over again. So it causes terrific impact to water infrastructure and also irrigation systems. And I know BC Hydro is really concerned about it. We don't have it in BC yet, but it has been found in Idaho. And it's a freshwater mussel. It's grows in high concentrations, and it can survive up to 30 days out of the water in the form of a veliger, a little type of larva. It's got a huge environmental, economic, and social impacts. Not located west of Manitoba. Lake of the Woods, or Winnipeg Lake, I think, has it now, and east. Quite well established in the northern US states and in Ontario. And there's a provincial program to stop their spread. And you might see these checks down along the Alberta border, any of the major highways that are leading in and out of BC, either from the US or in Alberta. And you're required to stop, and they will check your boat, even if it's a canoe. And if they find zebra or quagga mussels or their veligers, their larvae on your boat, they can quarantine them for up to 30 or 40 days. And there's been some people that haven't been very happy about that, but it's also, I think it's a necessary action to take. Smallmouth bass, aggressive predator preying directly on native fish, lots of small trout and salmonids, and it outcompetes the native species. And it's been introduced often intentionally in BC as it's a big sport fish down in the States. And the sport fishermen might feel that this is a great thing to bring in. And like most invasive species, they're alien and they're brought in either intentionally or unintentionally. And with a lot of the plant species, it was unintentional. Back in the 1800s, they're coming over from Europe, and their immigrants are bringing over a little piece of the homeland. Maybe it's a Dalmatian toadflax plant for their garden, or they're bringing in alfalfa seed and it's contaminated with knapweed, or they're bringing in other crop seed and it's got hoary cress in it. So they weren't always aware of what they were bringing. Other people are aware of what they're bringing, and that's mostly in the modern day. Hopefully that's what the education and outreach programs are accomplishing, is making people aware of what not to do and what not to bring in. I mentioned goldfish earlier. They get released out into the lakes and they can grow up to 40 centimeters. They can grow huge and very large. If you're familiar with Quesnel area, Dragon Lake is full of goldfish. And there are so many goldfish in Dragon Lake, it's impossible to get rid of them unless they actually went in and killed off the entire lake. But there's a lot of research being done on goldfish up there, and every year they have a little day where they go out and net all the goldfish that they can and put them on the shore, because goldfish tend to congregate around the edge of the lake shore. But they damage the spawning grounds, and then also are voracious on small other native fish too. Eurasian water milfoil, we've been dealing with it in BC for a number of years, from the 70s down in the Okanagan Lake. It's in the Shuswap Lake as well, and found in a number of other lakes around BC. It can change water turbidity, it reduces the oxygen content, and it reduces the recreational activities. And with the climate change and the temperatures of the lakes increasing even by half a degree or 1 degree over a few years, it can really increase the density and growth of milfoil. And there's a number of different other native milfoils too that are similar, but not exactly the same. And even we see the native milfoils increasing too. And the real concern with them is in water, in swimming areas where the swimmers can get tangled up in this stuff, and then panic sets in, and then often drowning can occur. And typically Management is to go out and cut it, but one of the things with cutting milfoil is it produces a lot of fragments, and milfoil will reproduce from plant fragments. It will float somewhere and stop and get caught up in the substrate and start regrowing. Yellow flag iris, we don't have a lot in BC. Up in Clearwater in the TNRD region, up in the Caribou around Bridge Lake, and also up in the Central Caribou region as well. And it's the only yellow iris, apparently, and it can form very dense mats, and it spreads by root fragments and floating seeds. And what it'll do is it'll grow around the edges of lakes, and it will be it won't allow any turtles or reptiles to go through. It almost forms a real solid wall. It's got these deep corms, and they're very difficult to dig out. But tenacity and regular removal by hand and digging in these areas has produced some success and helped to reclaim some of these lakeshore areas. Dr. Catherine Tarasoff is a local research scientist with Agro West, and she's done extensive work with yellow flag iris using benthic barriers, so big rubber mats, and it just smothers them, and it's been very effective, and it doesn't affect the water quality or anything. And if there's yellow flag iris there, it's probably complete solid monoculture, so you're really not destroying anything else other than the yellow flag, and then starting to see some native aquatic species return. Clipping flowers can stop it from going to seed and spreading that way. Removal by hands, and as I mentioned, benthic mats. And there's a good example of that benthic mat that they use. And they weigh it down with heavy rocks or concrete bricks, and so it doesn't move and float. Flowering rush is another invasive plant species that grows in aquatic. It's only found in Bushy Lake in the west of Quesnel, and down in the Hatzick Lake out near Maple Ridge or the Hatzick area. And those are the only two areas in BC that we know of with flowering rush. And it resembles a large sedge. It's difficult to identify without the flowers because it's just a sedge or a rush leaf plant. And it will also reproduce by fragments. But they've done a lot of manual control, and they've incorporated some other management techniques that are proving very successful. So I mentioned a couple of things here that we do as far as outreach materials. We have a Plant-Wise program. Learn about invasive in your area, know what you grow and avoid invasive plants. And this Plant-Wise will offer information, and there's a couple of pamphlets here. Alternatives to invasive plants in your garden. What are some good native plants that look very similar to what you're growing that's invasive, but are non-invasive, and often they're native, or they're hybrids, horticultural species that we know won't spread and be invasive. So always keep that in mind. And we have that program for individuals, and we also work with the nursery industry as well with the Plant-Wise industry program. Grow Me Instead is the program, and it just, as I mentioned, gives you alternatives. Also on our website, BC Invasives, we've got lots of e-learning courses, videos that you can go in and view for free, and you can learn all about invasive plants in marinas or invasive plants in different situations. We are building that library, that video library all the time. And there's also some courses in there that are cost, but like, for example, a pesticide applicator certification course. We charge for that, but that's a 3 to 4 day course that if you're successful at writing the exam, it certifies you to apply herbicides in BC. Wildflower mixes, beware. There's lots of different potentially invasive species. This is bachelor buttons. It's in the Centuria families. Knapweed species are in the our Centuria genus. Baby's breath. Oxeye daisy is sometimes found in wildflower mixes. There's lots of mixes that don't even say what's in it. A lot of them do, but you know, if you are unsure about what species may be invasive or has the potential to be invasive in a mix, you know, check that out on the internet. Clean, drain, and dry, I mentioned that. Clean boats of all the mud and organic matter. Drain standing water and pull the plugs and the ballast, and dry your boat to ensure it is dry before launching in the next water system that you're going to go to. Stop the spread and identify weeds. There's a Weeds BMP app that's pretty good. It talks about different control methods, different weed species, concerns. Also, as I mentioned, iNaturalist for identification. Report your invasives to BC, to the Invasive Alien Species website. I think the Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Council that is under the TNRD, they take reports for invasives as well as we do, the council, on our website. And then there's also a BC app. Just go into Google and type in Report Invasives BC, and those apps will be available, or available on your app store on your phone. And that's it for me tonight.
So thank you so very much, Dave, for coming out tonight and sharing. I know some people still might have questions. Please stick around if you've got a few minutes longer.
Yeah, and
have
help yourself to this stuff, any of this material.
Yep, have a conversation. Do remember that we have the 50-50 draw. The QR code's over there on the side table. If you would like to purchase a Duffy's dinner ticket from me, we can do that tonight, or you can always come back and organize that again as well. It's good for what's left of May and all of June. And thank you all very, very much. We look forward to seeing you again the last Wednesday of June. And we have planned another speaker who will be talking about gardening with native plants. Thank you all again for coming tonight. Feel free to explore the hands-on room, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Take care.